This presentation, titled Delivering Assurance, the Importance of Working with Suppliers That You Know and Trust, comes to us from Mike Wilson, the Global Head of Ethical Trade and Responsible Sourcing for BRCGS. Mike joined BRCGS in June 2017 and has overall responsibility for the global standard for ethical trade and responsible sourcing and supporting products. He has spent the best part of 20 years designing, developing, and delivering a range of assurance solutions for global brands, manufacturers, and retailers along their supply chains from primary production through to point of sale. Having worked at all points within the retail agri-food value chain, Mike has gained a good understanding of the challenges that exist in the production and delivery of good quality products that meet the ever-increasing demands of discerning customers around the world, and also the risks that exist within the global supply chain. And with that, take it away, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you to Exemplar Global for the opportunity to present this. And I'm going to talk you through this presentation all about how the landscape of assurance and consumer demands is changing, some of the drivers behind those changes, and also some of the consequences on the providers of assurance services such as ourselves and other standard owners. Just to kick us off, I thought I'd introduce the business I work for and a little bit about what we've done and what we do now, and also how these changes in the assurance landscape are influencing and impacting ourselves as an organization, and how we are responding to those changes. So for those of you that don't know who we are, we started in 1996 as part of the British Retail Consortium. So we were part of the trade association that represents large UK retailers. And our initial raison d'etre was to establish a food safety standard that would address the due diligence requirements of retailers at the time. The environment at the time was one in which retailers had large teams of technical people that would go and visit their supply chain, and they would all undertake a series of checks to make sure that the food that was produced in those facilities was safe and legal. And there was a lot of duplication, and as you can imagine, a lot of frustration and unnecessary checks that were being done. The retailers got together through the trade association and they established what would become the very first food safety standard. The idea being, if it had been audited by a recognized certification body using that standard, that all of the retailers that were part of that trade association would then accept and recognize that single audit. You can see from the timeline there that there was a range of things that happened, and I guess that'll take me right through to 2016, where our business changed quite significantly. In late 2015, our business went through a strategic review, and our stakeholders, made up mainly of large brands, retailers, and manufacturers, were reviewing our role and what we could offer them in terms of the assurance services that we deliver. What had happened in the years preceding that is the array of risks that those retailers were facing and that those brands had to contend with had increased dramatically beyond the physical properties of the product itself. So whilst product quality, safety, and legality are still absolutely key and critical aspects in the process of supplying, the array of risks that the retailers were facing had extended beyond the physical parameters of the product. And you will recall incidents like, for example, the collapse of Rana Plaza in Bangladesh and the loss of lives, the tragic loss of lives of workers in that incident. And that had a profound impact on the brands that were procuring from there, because the consumers were very, very conscious and aware of the impact that their purchase decisions could and would have on the supply chains that were supplying the goods that they were buying. And so retailers and brands started reconfiguring and re-looking at the risks that they were facing in their supply chains, and ethical trade and responsible sourcing became a really, really hot topic. Our review, our strategic review, culminated in the realization that our food safety, our product safety standards primarily, were not addressing these broader array of risks. And the decision was taken to strategically invest in reconfiguring our service to start looking at these risks. And that's where we were engaged with the trade association that was our owner at the time, and they wanted us to invest and expand, deepen and broaden our assurance services that we were offering. But as a trade association, there was no investment capability, and so our business went to market. And in 2016, we were purchased by the LGC Group, who were able to invest in our business and make us fit for future. That started the process of the development of a range of products, one of which, and in fact, a couple of which I'll be telling you about during this presentation this afternoon. So just a little bit of how we see ourselves. LGC is a life sciences business, and the vision of the business, the company, is science for a safer world. And we very much see ourselves as fitting into that vision. Our mission is to improve brand confidence through rigorous supply chain assurance services. And so we've tailored our service offering entirely around creating a range of services that help to assure the product and to help underpin the trust that the consumer has in the brands that they buy, and that they support through their purchasing decisions. We're a global organization, so we have our head office in London. We've expanded our operations to North America, where we have an office in Toronto and in Chicago. And also in the Far East, we have a representative and an office in Shanghai and also in New Delhi. So we are expanding our operation and moving closer to where production takes place, but also staying close to the specifiers, as we call them, who are driving the standards ever upward. We work through what we call delivery partners. These are all accredited certification bodies, 69 in total. And through a network of training partners, we're able to make sure that auditors are trained properly, that our sites have access to training to help them understand the standards that we are delivering, and so on. And we currently deliver our services through these certification bodies to over 29,000 sites globally now. So that slide is out of date, and that number is increasing every month. So the point of this presentation, I've basically got 6 key points that I want to talk to you about, and it's all framed around assurance. And the definition of assurance, I think, is quite important, because it's at the end of the day what we need to do to underpin the value of a brand. And delivering assurance to a consumer is about us fulfilling a positive declaration intended to give confidence to the consumer. It is, in essence, our promise. And to frame that assurance, that need, I wanted to talk to you about 6 key points. The first being brand value is inextricably linked to trust. There's loads of case studies and examples of where brands have lost the trust of the consumer, and how that has impacted on the value of those brands. I think we also need to understand the consumer and the context of the consumer in the process of establishing trust. This is very, very important, because it's almost immaterial what I think and feel, and entirely material what my customer thinks and feels, because at the end of the day, it's that perception that I need to relate to. I need to fulfill their expectations in order to conclude that transaction. And in order to do that, I have to understand the context of that consumer and the values that they hold. I think trust is a valuable commodity. I think increasingly we're seeing consumers are willing to pay more. They're willing to dig deeper into their pockets if they think there is some additional value in the transaction. I would cite examples such as the fair trade movement in that. whereby consumers will pay a little bit extra for a slab of chocolate that covers or that carries the fair trade logo, not because the chocolate tastes particularly different, but primarily because of the values that sit behind the fair trade logo. So that additional sort of feel good factor actually drives value in the consumer's mind as well. And I think really key to this whole discussion is that this definition of quality is changing. Quality is now more than just the physical attributes of the product that people buy. Quality extends behind and into that product. And we talk about labor behind the label and these sorts of organizations that try and highlight the importance of where products come from, how they were made, who made them, and the impacts that those products and the raw materials had on the environment and the communities that they are sourced from. That leads me on to point number 5, where we talk about how all of these key points are driving a change in the assurance requirements. And finally, I guess, as a stakeholder in the process, how are we as an organization responding to these changes? This is a great quote from Warren Buffett, and I think it kind of encapsulates that first point about the brand value being linked to trust. It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you'll do things differently. We live in a world where information is instantly accessible, where something that happens on the other side of the world is a big fat news story within seconds. We have social media, we have news, we have television, we have digital channels that bombard us with information 24/7. And we are digital natives. We are in an age where we demand access to information and we use that information in the way that we conduct our lives. And that makes it even more important to make sure that we know what we're doing when it comes to the value chain that we are sourcing from. Understanding the consumer and how they influence the value process. We're in a generational cohort, or a change in generational cohort. You can see from that illustration there how millennials have now gone past Generation X's in terms of buying power. And this is important because the values of millennials have changed. What they look for has changed. They are hungry for information. They're quite demanding in terms of what they want and what they expect. Their expectation has moved beyond getting a good deal and into the realms of making sure that there is a sustainability built into their purchase decisions, and they use their dollars and their pounds and pence to influence brands, retailers, and people that are providing and producing these products. And that is an important change. And you can see how that generational cohort is going to change again with post-millennials, which drives another learning process in terms of understanding what these people are after. Looking at the US market, this is just a snapshot of how these claims drive value, how trust is a valuable commodity. This is just a projection of how sustainable product sales in the US are going to escalate over the coming years. And you can see there by 2021, they're predicting that these sales may go past the 150 billion US dollar mark. And that's a significant change if you look at where it was in 2014. So that's not even a 10-year increase there in time, but it's a significant increase in the value prospect. This is for goods that carry a mark that say, free from or sustainably sourced or responsibly sourced or something like that. Something that talks to the values directly to the consumer. So it is a business to consumer message. And how is this changing the assurance framework? How does this change the way that we look at what we're doing? Well, I guess at the hub of everything remains compliance. We have to make sure that the products that are sold meet the minimum legal and safety requirements. That's non-negotiable. We can never take our eye off that ball. And so in this illustration, compliance remains core. But I think increasingly, we cannot ignore the importance of performance, particularly where items and issues related or challenges related to sustainability are concerned. You can be a perfectly compliant business today that goes out of business tomorrow or in a short time frame because your business performance is not very good. And so we simply can't take our eye off that ball, because we need to make sure that the two of these things are developed at the same time to deliver the assurance that our customers demand and that the consumers are looking for. We talk about climate change and global warming. We talk about modern slavery and human rights abuse within the value chain. And that for me is where that compliance angle really rests and sits. But what about the performance? How about doing more with less? How about managing the limited resources that we have? How about looking after the environment so that our children and our grandchildren are able to enjoy it? And that for me is around the performance of the businesses. And you'll find that consumers are looking for more information on where these products come from and how they've been produced. Was there any deforestation involved in the production of this particular item? Were any communities removed from their land, their indigenous land, in order to plant the commodity that's being sold? So business performance and compliance is part of the two sides of the same coin that we need to be conscious of. And just an illustration, and this talks to how risk is fundamentally different. When we talk about food safety risk, we're talking about something physical, something tangible, something that can be measured and tested for and seen. And so we've developed an extensive set of controls around this. And the businesses that we deal with in the food industry and the retail agri-food chain are well aware of these things. We've had HACCP since the 60s. We've moved on to TACCP and VASCP and all sorts of other controls, sophisticated management system adaptations to make sure that that product is safe and legal. And we've developed technologies that can help us test and if necessary, remove product at any tier within that supply chain. So if I were to use any commodity, if I were to use wine as a commodity there, by the time it gets to the customer, I could have tested that at the point of where the grapes are produced that go into the wine, at the point where the grapes are crushed before it's made into wine, at the cellars before it's bottled, and at the distributor before it's sent to the retailer. So at any point in time, I can test for physical risk and remove the product. And it's different to reputational risk. So where human rights are concerned and where environmental transgressions are concerned, these are soft risks that cannot be tested for. And you'll see how this transfers all the way through the supply chain, all the way up to the point of sale. And invariably, that's where the damage gets done. So when it comes to reputational risks, such as ethical risks or environmental risks, we simply cannot ignore the influence of the lower tiers of the supply chain. It does become substantially and significantly important where those ingredients come from that sit in that wine bottle. It's not just about that wine or that finished product. And you can see as well in the next slide how the relationship between the source of the risk and the impact of the risk helps us to think differently about where we control these risks. If we think about our world at the moment, there's a lot of brands and retailers that will certify one layer down. So they might certify their tier one suppliers. Perhaps it's an importing agent, perhaps it's a manufacturer of goods. And that facility is audited, it's certified, it's compliant, generally speaking. We don't, at this stage, go deeper down into the supply chain, not on a great scale at the moment, although it is increasing. And if you look at this illustration, it shows you how our controls are inversely proportional to the impact of risk. At tier one, for every one manufacturer, I might have 1,000 suppliers as I go down that supply chain from that previous slide I just illustrated. And we're focusing on tier one and tier two. So at max, we're looking at 1 in 10, whereas the risk implication is 100 and 1,000. So for every 1,000 growers that are growing grapes for wine, for example, they might all go into a single retailer. At the moment, that retailer might only be looking at the 10 facilities that are bottling its wine. What about the 1,000 farms that are growing the grapes for that retailer? Do we know anything about them? Are they listed on any supply chain lists anywhere? These are the kinds of things that the standards need to start looking at when it comes to managing and effectively controlling reputational risk. This leads me to I guess a change in the way we think, and this is a great thing. Is when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So now we've had a brief look at how the supply chain is prevalent and changing, and how important it is in managing reputational risk. Previously our focus has been around management systems to control the quality and safety of the product on the site that's being audited. But what about the supply chain? What about the risks that we can't see and test for? And so now we start looking at that product a little bit differently, understanding that there's a whole lot of stuff going on behind that product. So what does this mean? We have to look at the different drivers of risk. We have to look at the environment. We have to look at the communities where the product is sourced from. We have to look at the way that that product is sourced and the transactions that take place within that value chain. We have to think differently about risk. We have to look beyond the physical boundaries of the product and start looking into product provenance, and considering the importance of the role of product provenance. If I make a claim about a product, I must be 100% certain that that claim is valid and trustworthy. Again, I go back to my earlier comment about the link between consumer trust and brand value. If I mislead that consumer and I lose their trust, I damage my brand in some cases irreparably. So I have to understand the role of provenance, particularly where trust is concerned. Once we've done this, we need to adjust our approach. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And we simply can't expect to address risks that we're not doing anything about. But I think that the response needs to be moderate and controlled. The global supply chain is incredibly complex and it's big. We're not going to resolve this tomorrow or the next day. This is a change in the way we think. It's not necessarily or only a change in the way we do. So we really have to change the way we think. And if we change the way we think and change the way we look at things and our value chains, then our value chains start to change as well. And we start to change and adapt our approach to ensuring that the products that we're buying are sourced responsibly and produced ethically. A practical sort of look at how we can achieve it. This is all quite abstract, and whilst it may make sense from a conceptual perspective, how do we take that concept and turn it into practice? What are some actual physical practical steps that we can take? And this talks to the title of the presentation. We spoke earlier about delivering assurance and the importance of working with suppliers that we know and that we trust. What does it mean to know our suppliers and build trust? What physical and actual steps can I take to build that knowledge and trust? Well, I can acquire knowledge through establishing an inventory list or a supplier register. Who am I buying from? Number one. Number two, who are they buying from? And so I push these requirements down my supply chain. I cascade these principles through my supply chain. And I'm saying to them, I have to know who you are buying from, because collectively we're both at risk. If there's anything within that supply chain that can bring us into disrepute, it's going to affect both of our businesses. And so we acquire knowledge through an inventory list. Let's understand a bit more about the profile of our suppliers. What products are they producing? What are the workers' status that are working for them? Where are they operating? Are they operating in environmentally sensitive areas? And these kinds of things. And then let's categorize them. Let's risk assess them first, and let's identify those that we would consider to be high risk, medium risk, and low risk. Just like you would approach a HACCP in a food safety world, or an operational organizational health and safety risk assessment. What's the likelihood of something going wrong? And if it does go wrong, what is the severity of that? What is the likelihood of something happening within a supply chain that I'm not aware of that could do damage. Once I've done that, once I've categorized my supply chain and I understand who of my suppliers are high risk, medium in risk, and low risk, I can then start applying my controls. And I talked earlier about a moderate and controlled response. It must be risk based. We can't sort of take a one size fits all approach simply because it's not efficient, but also because we don't have the resources to do it. So apply the controls where they need to be controlled, and that's your high risk suppliers. Once we've acquired that knowledge, once we have a very clear understanding of what our supply chain looks like, we need to build up that trust. We need to establish a framework within which trust can be established and measured and built up. And that starts with a code of conduct. I have to make my values known to my supply chain. I have to tell them that we do not employ children, that we only work a certain number of hours and that we record those hours, that we take care of people's health and safety while they're on site, and that we govern our business with good corporate governance and we don't accept bribes. So I make this known to my suppliers and I say to them, these are the values by which I do business. I expect you to comply with these and respect my values. And that code of conduct gets passed down. And you'll find this happening in supply chain contracts these days, where suppliers are required to sign acknowledgement that they've received, read, and understood that code of conduct and that they agree to abide by those requirements. So the code of conduct is, in essence, the rules of the game. This is the rules by which we'll play, and you need to agree to play by those rules. Next, let's do an assessment according to our the risk categorization. That if it's a low risk supplier, it might be a self-assessment. You might send a questionnaire to the supplier to say, tell me a little bit about yourself. If it's a high risk supplier, that might look like a third party audit, and you might ask that the supplier goes through a third party independent audit process. This is all about continuous improvement. This is not about compliance immediately and enforcing compliance. It is very much about a measured and controlled response to an unknown. We don't know what's going on in our supply chain, and so we simply don't know the scale and scope of what needs doing. So the first job is to find out, and then it's to commit to continuous improvement and say, listen, I know there's something going wrong, but I'm going to commit to improving it. And so we can see how we've established compliance, we've set out the rules of the game, and we said these are the rules that you need to play by. We've started measuring performance, so we're talking about how we can understand within the profile of your business what's going on, and together we can deliver assurance to the consumer or to the end user of that product that they are buying a product that's been sourced responsibly and produced ethically. And this has kind of informed the way that we as an organization are going about our day-to-day business. And, you know, we've also learned a lot through the process. You know, even our food safety standards evolved. We're now on version 8 of that. So these are not static. This is not about a standard that, you know, once it's set, it stays like that. We use performance and we use our learning to continuously evolve the standards so that the standards do get ever higher as the consumer demands change. And in our world, we've looked at the assurance that consumers want, and we've said it rests on these 4 pillars. So you would have heard about the 3 P's of sustainability: people, profit, and planet, and more conventionally termed ESG, or environment, social, and governance aspects. We see a 4th pillar, and we think that this is also key to the value proposition, and that is the product. At the end of the day, it's the product that is the means of the transaction. I'm buying something. I can't underestimate the importance of the quality of that something. So for us, the 4 pillars of assurance that we need to secure and deliver a promise on are product, people, planet, and profit. Running through all of these pillars is the need for a management system that's got the capacity and the capability to make sure that it's running that business properly. And we're not saying for a second that everything is 100% compliant 100% of the time. That's not what we're after. This is the real world, and we understand it. But what we are saying is that the management system, through the normal process of plan, do, check, act. We're saying, has the management got the, firstly, capability to check that things are, to understand where things are going wrong and fix it? And secondly, has it got the capacity? Has it got enough resource allocated? Has it got people that are trained? Have people got the protective equipment that they required? Is the business investing enough resource in itself to make sure that these standards are upheld? So you'll find that cross-cutting through all of the standards that we've developed, our first two sections, the first section is always all about senior management commitment, and the second section is always all about the quality management system, the document control, and the policies and the procedural frameworks that hold the whole business together. And then sitting on top of that, we start differentiating on the 4 pillars below. So for our product module, we've got safety and legality, and also product quality and GMPs, good management practices. For our ethical or people pillar, we've got labor standards, health, safety, and welfare, and human rights. And then as we go down the line and develop our portfolio further, we'll get into the environment where we're looking to cover legal compliance. So making sure that sites are permitted to draw water from water sources, that they've got permission to be building factories where they're building them, and so on and so forth, and also minimization of negative impact. And finally, the governance or the profit section, which looks at, again, legal compliance and also the ethics and the integrity of the business itself. What we're currently doing and what we will continue to do is we will accommodate what we call additional voluntary modules. And the idea behind this is to allow some flex, some room for customization for customers, brands, retailers, and specifiers that may have their own requirements. They might have a particular issue over, let's say, for example, land use rights. That might be a hot topic for a particular brand or retailer or manufacturer. Our standard, whilst it does have 1 or 2 questions about land use rights, it may not go into the level of detail that specifier requires. The AVM, or the additional module on the top there, allows us to bolt those additional questions in there. The idea being, if a site has had that with the additional voluntary module, they don't then need to go through a full re-audit against a particular private standard. And in this way, we are driving convergence and trying to minimize and reduce, and in fact, in some cases, hopefully eliminate the necessity of audit duplication. So that's kind of how we see our world evolving. Obviously, we are well experienced and have been for some time in the product pillar. We've just released our ethical trade standard, which I'll tell you more about in a second, which addresses that people pillar. And we are currently in the process of developing our response for environment and also governance as well. There's a kind of an indication of the standards that we've developed. And, again, talking to the value chain, we've got a standard that addresses the production of the product. We've got a standard that addresses the distribution and storage of the product. We've got a standard that addresses the agents and brokers within the supply chain. And we've got a standard that addresses retail. So we've looked at that value chain and we've said, where are the key points in that supply chain where products can become or are vulnerable, and how do we secure that? How do we provide assurance right throughout that supply chain? Increasingly towards the right of that illustration there, you'll see we're responding to, some of them are emerging, some of them are existing. But we're looking at what consumers are asking for, and we're speaking to our advisory boards and saying, what assurance do you guys need us to respond to? There's a gluten-free certification program that's been developed, and it's in its third edition. I'll tell you more about the ethical trade and responsible sourcing standard in a second, but you can see on the far right there, we've got a standard that we call START. This is about emerging markets. This is about developing countries that may not have been involved in certification for that long. It might be small to medium enterprises that don't have the resource that other big companies do. That's an opportunity for an organization to take a step-by-step approach into the world of assurance without having to go for that full-on big audit up front. So again, it's horses for courses, and making sure that our organization is able to adapt to the requirements of our customers. So let me talk to you about how we've developed our ethical trade and responsible sourcing standard. In the process, as we've done with all of our standards, we called together a multi-stakeholder working group, and that working group is responsible for helping us develop the content of the standard. This is not a standard that we write and say, this is what you need in it. This is a standard that's been pulled together by a group of stakeholders, experts. And the core standard, in essence, is a full ethical audit. That's it's the triangulation process. So we'll have a qualified social auditor on site who will look at our labor standards, the health and safety and human rights, and they will evaluate the management system of that organization in the context of that standard, using what we call a triangulation technique. And it's common in most social audit frameworks, whereby we use three types of evidence: documentary evidence, verbal evidence, and visual evidence. And the auditor, through the application of their skills, will determine compliance with the requirements of our standard. Coming out of those discussions, it was identified that there is a need for a risk assessment. The best way to explain this is it's a health check, and it gives organizations the opportunity to have a quick look at what's going on in their business from an ethical trade and responsible sourcing point of view. The idea is for businesses that are established and have had full ethical audits, the risk assessment is a great way to support the internal audit program. It's done by the technical auditor, so it's not a full ethical audit. It doesn't require a social auditor qualification to be able to be carried out. Again, using the health assessment analogy, the health assessment doesn't need to be done by a surgeon or a doctor. It can be done by a medical practitioner or a nurse, using a set of equipment and also comparing the results to a chart. It can give you an indication of a level of health. And that's exactly what this risk assessment is designed to do. It looks at 5 vital signs, and it gives the site a little bit of a ready reckoner into how they are comparing to what good looks like when it comes to ethical trade and responsible sourcing. That was released in August 2019, and that's starting to address the people aspect of those 4 pillars. Something that's been in the press a lot, something that's been on social media a lot, something that celebrities and a lot of people are talking about. This shift away from animal-based protein to plant-based. It's a way of life for some. It's a statement, but increasingly it's becoming a conscientious choice. It's becoming a health choice, and plant-based is something that we expect to become increasingly important in consumers' minds. Very, very closely linked to global warming, sort of the livestock industry, we see that these claims are being made at point of sale. And again, how do we substantiate those claims? How do we make sure that the consumer that's buying that product can trust the claim that's being made? And so this stand looks to be able to back up those claims and support sites that are selling plant-based products. That's due to be launched in January 2020. Again, another thing that's been part of our food safety standard for a while now is the importance of culture. We're increasingly becoming aware of the importance and the driver of culture in a workplace on how people behave and think, and the impact that has on compliance and consequently on the assurance as well. And we're saying that from a food safety perspective and from an ethical perspective, the culture of that organization is a critical component. Those people have to be trained properly. They have to have bought into the policies and procedures of the organization. And that's measured through the food safety cultural excellence module that we are partnering with a couple of organizations on. And it's a behavior-based system. And it's saying, when we look at your site and we pick up and detect non-conformances, a lot of those non-conformances, the root cause is the behavior of the people. And that's either driven because they don't know or because they don't care, both of which link back to the organization's culture. How can we measure that? And how can we assist organizations to understand, firstly, what their culture is, and secondly, how to improve it? We've developed again, in recognition of the importance of people, we've developed a people development program called our professional program. It's a learning a framework that helps people get recognition for their skills and the development thereof when it comes to food safety and assurance. And we'll be including our ethical product in there as well. But the idea is to give somebody that's been trained credit, to help them to have something that they can show their skills and qualifications with, and also to add value to the individuals that are participating in these programs as well. So it's not just about responding to the technical aspects of the site. It's also about helping to develop the people that have such a critical a role to play in the application of our standards, and the compliance and the performance of the sites where they work as well. And this leads me back to our overall mission and vision. And we keep looking at this is our true north. This is kind of what we keep looking at and testing ourselves against and saying, how is what we're doing improving brand confidence? And how are we staying rigorous? How are we staying true to our mission, and ultimately achieving our vision of science for a safer world? And I think that sums up our, the kind of the changes that we see going on in the world around us, and also a little bit about our response to those changes. And we won't stop here. We know that data and learning and information is critically important, and so we're investing heavily in our digital capability as well. We're looking at learning more about predictive analytics. The idea being, if I can identify a series of events and link that series of events to for example, a product recall, then I can start using data and indicators to predict when and where and how something is going to happen. And so we can proactively approach the role of assurance. And that's the way that the audit world is moving. It's starting to look at how it can use its history of looking at reactive or non-conformances that are historic to drive a world that's proactive and constantly looking at avoiding these things from happening again. So we're investing heavily in our digital strategy. We're investing heavily in the development of further training. We're looking at different ways of auditing. How do we use technology that doesn't rely on auditors physically going onto a site for a day or two every year, but helps us use, for example, the Internet of Things to start regularly and continuously monitoring things. And all of this being framed around that opening statement of the importance of delivering assurance to consumers through working with suppliers that we know and that we trust. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this. I certainly am learning a lot as we go along, and I look forward to fielding questions and perhaps discussing this further with you.
Mike, for that in-depth perspective on the importance of working with suppliers that you know and trust. And that concludes this presentation.